It's also like that
Oh
old
my God.
stereotypical German accent that you also hear in those kinds of shows where they don't, the Germans don't speak like that, where it's like
Excellent.
Und ja, we are going to
Yeah.
be going to the store now. No one speaks like that.
Well,
Okay, yeah, not no one, not no one. It's the Germany Experience, the podcast about life in Germany as seen through the eyes of outsiders, and welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Sean, and this week I am talking to an Italian woman living in Munich who is trilingual, so we're going to get to that later. But first, on the Facebook group, the Germany Experience Facebook group, I posted about the coronavirus warn app. I guess it's Warn app. I don't know how the Germans would pronounce it, but they've put out an app that's there to warn people if they've been in contact with other people who have had coronavirus. So how does it work? Well, basically it uses your phone's Bluetooth and sends a Bluetooth ID to other phones using the app, and those phones register that they've been in contact with that Bluetooth ID. And then what happens is if you get coronavirus, then you have to go into your app and say, I tested positive. And then everybody that you've been in contact with your Bluetooth ID, basically, they get a notification saying that they were in contact with coronavirus. Theoretically, it's a great idea. It doesn't do any location tracking, and they've really done a great job. I actually read through the terms and conditions and the privacy messages. I mean, no one does that, but I did that because I wanted to be sure about this thing before I installed it. And they've done a good job. It doesn't do any location tracking. It keeps things as anonymous as possible. It's just working on this Bluetooth ID aspect. So I asked in the Facebook group, because I've heard a lot of people say they're hesitant to install it. They don't want Germany, the Bundesregierung, tracking them. So I asked the question on the German Experience Facebook group if people would be interested in installing it, or if they would install it. And 86% of you said you would. And I think that's a lot higher than I was expecting, because it seems like a lot of people are against it. And like I said, a lot of people are complaining about the privacy aspect. But what a colleague of mine pointed out, and rightly so, the same people who are complaining about the app and the privacy are complaining on Facebook. Facebook, the app that knows far more than the coronavirus warn app ever will about you. So anyway, but I must admit right now the app is pretty pointless, because it doesn't make sense if not a lot of people have it. If I'm using it and people who are getting coronavirus are not using it, I will never know that they tested positive and that I was exposed to them. So we actually need a lot of people. I think I saw a study that said at least 50 or 60% of the population to install this app to make it meaningful and to make it work. Now, also this week, I was a guest on the Expat Cast with Nicole, and we talked about our feelings about the current situation in the United States of America. So we shared our reactions about racism, and we talk about our observations and feelings as white people, as podcasters, as expats in Germany specifically, and as people from countries with a history of racial problems. As you know, South Africa had apartheid. It's a difficult discussion to have as two privileged white people, but hopefully we do the topic justice. And I've got a clip for you from the episode so you can get a feeling of what we discussed. Take a listen.
Another thing that's just been important to me is in this whole journey of talking more about race is, again, just in some facets of this conversation, there's more than one right answer and or more than one right action, and just sort of learning a little bit of patience and understanding with that. There's sort of this online culture to point fingers and name call quickly and to really chastise people for not getting into line with your opinion. And I'm really hesitant about that. So yeah, for me, I find my power and my purpose in this by being a little bit more patient and slow going, and maybe that's wrong to some people, but in that case, I just would encourage them to act as feels right to them, and that serves a role too, and just to see each other's power, just because if someone didn't post a black square on a certain day doesn't mean that they're encouraging racism. Like they might have their own action that they did that meant more and made more sense for them, and just a little understanding about that I think goes a long way.
I think that's a good approach, because I think finger pointing doesn't help at this point. It doesn't help to stand up and say, well, you're doing it wrong, because there are a lot of people doing it wrong. And even as we've discussed here, even people who are aware of everything are also doing some things wrong. But the important thing is to get these points out in the open and to make them. And even if people disagree with them at first, or some people think, well, that's rubbish, it's important that these points are being made and that there's so much conversation about this right now, because everyone's on their own journey. And some people will take longer to get there. There is a time to hold people accountable, but there's also, now's the time to be a little understanding that this is a lot for people who are suddenly having this realization, who are suddenly on the side of this cause, saying, okay, this is a thing. It's a very tricky time. And I think the best thing, like you said, was just to get these points out there, to get these conversations going and make sure that enough people come into contact with these points so that they can think about it and take it into their own lives and hopefully make changes. So go to the Expat Cast and listen and subscribe if you haven't already. So my guest on this episode is Carmen from Italy. She is the host of a podcast in Italian, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name of. And she also is the co-host of a German podcast called Farbe der Nation, which translates as Color of the Nation. And she discusses issues of discrimination and racism with her co-host. Carmen originally came to Germany because she wanted to, but as she described it, she moved to Munich for love. She completed a master's in political sciences here, and she works in the field of civic education, so she organizes public events and discussions about political topics and so on. She also recently became a German citizen. Now, on top of all this, Carmen is trilingual. So she speaks Italian, German, and English fluently. So we discuss the things like what language she speaks with her husband at home, what it's like balancing 3 languages, and the effect on her native language that learning the other 2 languages has had. And we also get into some Italian words that German has stolen and misused. And I can almost guarantee you're using bravo incorrectly. Here's Carmen. So you speak 3 languages. So tell me about how that progressed. Is it, I mean, obviously Italian is your native language. Yeah. And then what came next? Was it English that you learned next, or what was your path to learning these 3 languages?
Actually, I have a weird path because the first language I learned in school, it was French. Because French in Italy was more the international language you would study.
Okay.
And my teacher at the elementary school, she knew better French than English. So she just
that was the
taught
language.
us French, yes. So I started learning English for the first time actually when I was 11 or 10, when I moved to middle school. And it was super hard for me at the beginning, but then I just enjoyed the language and started, watching stuff or listening to music and stuff. So that got better. I had to thank, of course, good teachers along the way, as always happens. Yeah. But I always loved languages, I think mainly for the influence of my father. At the peak, let's say, at the peak of his capacities, he could speak 9 languages.
What?
Yes. I mean, he was kind of cheating because he lived in Sweden and Norway for many years. Okay. So he was speaking Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. So it's basically cheating there.
No, Carmen, I think that we can give him those languages. But yes, they're similar. I mean, that of course. But wow.
Yeah.
So that was 3 of his 9.
Yeah. And then there's Italian, French, Spanish, German, English, and modern Greek.
Why? How did that happen?
He just loved, he moved very young. I think he was 21 to Sweden. And then just traveled a lot. He was a painter, so he used to travel a lot for his exhibitions and stuff. And he was just a natural.
Yeah.
I
Some
guess.
people are. Some people are.
Yeah. And so I grew up listening all these weird different languages from friends coming over and visiting us and stuff. So I remember when I was 12, we were invited to a wedding of English friends in Florence. And I remember I couldn't understand a word. They were from Manchester and they had such a thick accent.
Yeah, that Manchester accent is
oh my God, it was impossible.
Difficult
and
one.
I remember that a few months later, we had a phone call with them and I was able to make my first joke or pun in English. And I was so proud.
That's
that
amazing.
was like the best feeling.
It is. And people laugh as well. And that's the best. When you make that joke and people laugh, you're like, oh my God, I just made a joke in another language.
Yes. Yeah. That is the best. Yeah. So English came during school. And then German started. Well, I had a kind of a back and forth with German because I studied German in middle school with English at the same time. Then I stopped also because I had like the worst teacher ever. And then I got back to it starting from the beginning during university.
Yeah.
And when I moved here, I had a level B1 or something. And I took a year off, only studying German and working because I was kind of like, poor student trying to pass by in a new country. And and that year was very helpful. Then I did the TestDAF, which is the German kind of TOEFL or other language certificates that you need to go to enroll to the university. And then I did my 2 years of master in German, and that was like helped me a lot because for 2 years I had to read, listen, talk, and write the language, and that pushed my.
You have no choice. You have to just
No, you have no choice. It's like when you don't know how to swim and someone push you in the water.
But in that case, you're not choosing to be in the water. Someone's pushing you in. But you're choosing to jump in the water when you can't swim.
Yeah.
Did you at that time? Did you just think this will be a piece of cake? I'll learn it because I can already speak pretty good German, or
no?
You just were like, "What am I going to do? I'm just going to do it and see what happens."
Yeah, because I wanted. I really liked the language. His being so specific and precise, and the wordings and the meanings. I mean, German doesn't sound good as other languages do, but when you read it and you understand it, it's so complex and beautiful. I really loved it. And of course it's super frustrating as well, and I'm sure I will never be perfect because can I swear on your podcast?
You can swear.
Is it allowed? Okay,
it's allowed.
Okay, so fucking Adjektivendungen. No one in their right mind will ever learn those perfectly.
No.
But that was my path.
Your husband is also trilingual, I guess. Would you describe him as trilingual? So the question is that I have is now. So you both have been on this path of learning different languages. You each have very, very good mastery of 3 languages. What do you speak at home? Is it Italian that you speak with each other at home?
It's actually a mixture. Like we have Italian as the base, and then depending on how tired we are on the topic of the conversation, then we switch to German or English.
Right.
Although I have to say English is more his second language, while German is more mine second language.
Okay.
And so we tend to switch to English with entire phrases, while for German, we usually use only single words.
Okay.
Like, for example, this happens especially when we are talking, like, I think it's interesting that you switch to certain languages depending on the topic of the conversation. Like, for example, if we are talking about work, we both work in German now, so you have specific words you don't use in everyday life, but only in a work context. So we have a phrase like in Italian, but we use that German word in the middle.
Right.
And it's funny because it's basically our own language.
Yes.
Like a couple of other people, like especially Italian friends living here, might understand us in this weird mixture. But I don't know. It's might be funny to see it from the outside.
We have a similar thing. I mean, my wife and I only speak 2 languages fairly fluently. I don't know if I should call myself bilingual because I think my German has still got a way to go, even though I'm fairly fluent, but I'm very bad grammatically at it. But we have two languages. We speak English at home, but it's exactly like you say. It's like we've evolved a language of our own, and we've noticed that when people come to visit us from South Africa or from USA or whatever, when people listen to us talking, they're sometimes like, "You're speaking English, but I don't know what you're talking about," because we'll say exactly like you did. We'll pull the German words for things in. Things, and I guess these things are things that we didn't reference a lot when we were living together in South Africa before we moved. So things, we didn't have a baby when we were in South Africa. So a lot of the baby stuff we talk about in English, but with the German vocabulary. So we'll say, let's go and get the Kinderwagen.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and makes sense.
And we also didn't have a basement. A lot of houses don't have basements in South Africa. So we'll go, let's go get the Kinderwagen from the Keller. So that's what it ends up being, is this weird English structure with the vocabulary kind of like shoehorned in with the stuff. And like
that's crazy, but also very fun.
It is fun.
Even though sometimes, I don't know if you share the same feeling, but you have every now and then this existential crisis, like you feel your own language is slipping away you can't speak it anymore because you can't find that word in your own language. And that's so frustrating. But sometimes I think, no, this concept doesn't exist in my language, so it's fine.
It exactly that. A lot of the times there's specific things that German is referencing that you can't reference in English, so then it's fine. But I do have that feeling, and it pains my soul, actually, because I love English. I love English, and I've always loved English. But I've been here for 13 years, and I've definitely noticed that my English is deteriorating at an alarming rate now. I think the longer I'm here, the faster it's deteriorating. And I think it's also because we're switching more to German. I'm not switching over to English anymore. So when I'm at work, I stay in German a lot longer than I used to. And I'm thinking a lot more in German. And it's just killing my English. And it really is sad, because that's something I was always proud of. Like, I had an above average, in fact, let's not be humble here. I had an exceptional grasp of the English language. It's my mother language, but I really was grammatically sound, great spelling, good vocabulary, and all that's gone. So it's like a part of my identity that I had before, like the English expert, is slowly dying away, and it's pretty tough.
Yeah, if I might give you a tip, what helped me when I realized that was reading books in Italian.
Okay.
Because that's where I got my excellent Italian, from books.
Yeah.
And so if you're reading stuff that are not super simple, like an article on the internet, but it's something that, I don't know, someone spent time to think on.
Yeah.
And it's that's helping me a lot.
So yeah, that's very good advice. But here's a question for you. What do you think? My problem with my reading at the moment, and exactly like you, my good English came from, I was a voracious reader when I was a teenager. When I was even a kid and then teenager, I would just devour books. I would devour books.
Then books are the best.
Yeah, but I lost touch with that a little bit when I got a job. I still read, but not as much. But now the problem is I'm reading a lot again, but only audiobooks. So my question is, do you think that has the same effect? I'm not reading like pulp novels. I'm sometimes reading some heavy nonfiction or maybe some philosophical things. Do you think it's enough to hear it in English, or you need to be reading it in the text?
I don't think so. Yeah? Because, I think it goes in two different ways. Like, while you're learning a new language, listening stuff in that language is super helpful to help you learn. For example, I used to listen to a Swedish podcast while I was learning Swedish, and that was super helpful. While if you want to maintain your own language, reading is more effective than listening, because you are obliged to keep concentrating only on the words. While if you're listening to something, you can also do something else
it's usually I'm driving
at the same
or something.
time. Yeah, exactly. So you're not fully concentrated on that. So I think it has less effect on the maintaining the language.
Yeah,
process.
I think you're right. I hate to admit it because I think that you're right, because also a lot of the memories that I have, and this is going to maybe sound weird, I don't know if you get this, but a lot of the memories I have of certain words are almost visual, like seeing the words. And when I can sometimes remember learning about certain words. When I read a word, I can remember learning it, how it felt when I was taking it in for the first time. And I think that's the connection you get when you're actually reading the text and seeing the shape of the words. It's a different experience. So, I'm afraid you might be right.
I'm sorry to be a party pooper. I'm so sorry. Don't be mad at me.
I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the situation. But yes,
I know.
It is. So you feel, but you do still feel that your Italian is, do you feel like it's deteriorating, or just that it's become something else with the German words in it?
I think it's, if I would try more, it would deteriorate less. But I think I'm kind of good now at keeping it at the same level. Like what I lost. But I'm working on maintaining the same level.
Right.
Also, like having a podcast in Italian is super helping me, because I have to talk only in Italian, because my audience is not 100% from like Italian expat or migrants like myself, but it's like half people living in Italy. And if I think about some friends that are not really excellent with the English language, then I'm doing the podcast also for them. So I'm trying hard not to mix up the languages. And sometimes I don't succeed always, but then, the magic of editing, I can cut it out.
Perfect.
Yes. I sound amazing.
Editing. It is a wonderful thing. I sound so much smarter after a good edit.
Yes.
So you said that you use German words to refer to things that are specifically German, but you also have English phrases that come in. What kind of phrases are those?
It changes. Like we usually use English if we are quoting or discussing a show or a podcast we are listening or watching in English, because it's the language of the medium, basically. Yeah. Or in preparation of this episode, I discussed with my husband about this, because I wanted to know his opinion, and he allowed me to quote him on this. His theory is that we speak in English also when we talk about emotions.
Really?
Because this way, since you're not using your own language but another language, we are good enough that we can understand deeper meanings.
Okay.
But since it's not your own language, you have some kind of emotional detachment from what you're talking. He quoted on this a funny podcast. I think it was the Nerdist podcast.
Oh, I love the Nerdist.
Yeah, he's very cool. And he interviewed once Antonio Banderas, and he was like, of course, it's super easy to, while acting, to say profound stuff like I love you, because it's I love you. But it would be very weird if I had to say something like te amo.
Right, because he has an attachment to that.
Yes, he has more of an emotional attachment to the meaning, like it means more while he's saying it. Mm-hmm. So I haven't given much of a thought on what my husband's theory, let's call it like that, but I think there's something to it.
It sounds
it's interesting.
It sounds about right, and I think a good example of that exact concept is the way that Germans swear in English. So they will say fuck in conversation, and they won't flinch, and they'll be in professional meetings sometimes, and they'll just throw that word out there.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm sometimes I mean, I don't mind swearing. But to me, when I hear those words in English, they have a lot more punch to it than it does to the Germans, who just sort of learnt it on movies or TV shows or wherever they heard it to be able to say it. So I think that was also something like that. Those words have an emotional knee-jerk reaction within me, whereas the German swear words don't. It's the same thing for me. Yeah, but I find it very interesting that you talk about emotions in something that's not your native tongue, because that's something I can't do in German. I can't utilize German to express myself adequately. I can get close, but there's sometimes nuances, and might just be my level of German. But and it happens at work as well. If I'm being emotional about something or passionate about something, I have to switch to English to get the point across. So that's very interesting that you both do that in a different language.
Yeah, and then there are these weird moments where you are extremely tired and you are talking to friends in another language and you start talking Italian without noticing. There are also those moments. Like the other day, I was talking to a colleague, and instead of saying "yeah," I said "si," and then I realized it, and I was like, "Sorry, yeah, I meant yes."
I can imagine that would happen when you're tired, because the way I see it, sometimes like you've got these narrow partitions between each language, and sometimes there's a bit of overlap. And then when you're tired, it's just your brain's gonna like, where do I get this word from? Screw it, I'm just getting this word from here or this phrase from here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you find that your grammar is also something that's changing because of the pull of the German or the English?
Mostly for the pull of the German, because let's face it, the English grammar is weird. Yes. It has thousands. Everything is an exception, basically.
Yeah.
So even though I learned the English grammar very well, it was way before I started actually speaking it a lot, so I don't really know if my grammar in English is that good. Yeah.
Case in point.
Example, case in point. Yes.
I thought you did that on purpose.
No, I didn't. But I corrected myself. Good joke. Oh, of course I did it on purpose. Yeah.
That's one of those jokes in another language thing. That's very smart, Carmen. Yes. Very smart.
I wanted to make you laugh. But like my point is, the German grammar is complicated, but has a very definite set of rules. And it's very different from the Italian grammar. So for me, to be able to speak the language, I really needed to understand the grammar and keep going. And I think I reached the point where I could speak better German when I noticed that the grammar errors of German speaker.
Okay.
Like, when I started noticing, and this might come to as a shocker for the people that are still at lower levels, but not every German use the verb at the end of the phrase.
No.
No.
What?
They also forget that. I know, mind-blowing.
It was something that came up in a few episodes ago. Thomas was on the show. He's from England, and his German is obviously at a very high level as well. And he said he got more confident with his German when he realized Germans speak terrible German.
Yes, yes, they do. They do. And that became kind of frustrating with me. I was kind of pissed.
Like, why am I putting all this effort in?
Yes. But yeah, my point was that some important structural grammar things from the German language, they got so stuck in my head that sometimes I found myself doing stuff in Italian, like putting the verb at the end of a phrase.
And you don't do that in Italian?
No.
Okay.
Usually we don't, or not in the same way as German do.
Right.
So sometimes, I realized that, and I was like, wait a minute, this phrase.
That's not right.
That's not right. I mean, it sounds right, but it's not.
Yeah. And for me, it hasn't had too much of an effect on the grammar of my English. that much. Every now and then I'll do something similar to you where I'll structure an English sentence because it's literally coming out of my head in a German structure. But it's also more when I'm tired. But what's had more of an effect on me in some ways is the errors that Germans make in English. So I've picked up some of those as habits now. So I find myself saying things like, when someone asks me where something is, I'm like, it's in the near of the Bahnhof, for example, because that's not so great on the ears, because in the near von dem Bahnhof, and that's something that I've caught myself doing a few times in English, and things like make a picture, because the Germans do that as well, instead of take a picture, because of course they machen Bild.
That is interesting. There's this famous phrase from the football trainer Trapattoni, Ich habe fertig, which is not correct.
Ich habe fertig.
Because it's Ich bin fertig. I have the same thing sometimes when I'm very tired, that I also tend to mix the verb having or being in Italian with depending on the German way. Yeah.
Yes. It's also something that happens for me too, because the Germans differentiate that, and I don't know about Italian, but English doesn't differentiate that movement, that like you said, that being. It's a very foreign thing to get your head around when you're first learning German.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes it's also funny because you kind of invent a new language when you start merging your own language with the other ones. Yeah. Like, for example, and I think if someone from the Italian community in Germany listen to this episode, they're gonna like feel that and see themselves in this. But when you arrive in Germany, and basically for everything it has to do with the bureaucracy, you have to do this, I think in English is kind of registration, the Anmeldung.
Anmeldung, yeah.
And basically we use within our Italian friends always the verb anmeldarsi, which is the Italian version of sich anmelden. Right. So basically it's if I would do that in English, like from German, it would be something like angemeldeted myself. because then you have the reflective of the verb. Yes.
Do you find as well that your pronunciation of Italian words is also getting weird? Because I find I don't hear a German, I don't hear an English word for a long time. So, because I'm living here in Germany, and there might be a few words that I don't hear, and then suddenly I try and use it, and then someone English says, that is not how you pronounce that word at all. So, that also happens.
I don't know if this happens to you as well, but when I go back to Italy for vacation or to visit the family, I need a couple of days to be my Italian self, in the sense of being able to speak fluently without these weird moments where I forget words. And usually in these couple of days, then it might be that I have some weird pronunciation, especially if I'm tired and I'm kind of still thinking in German while speaking Italian. But that almost never happens, because I think, how to put this into word, to me, learning the correct pronunciation is, if not half, one of the most important part of learning language. Yeah. So for me, it was super important at the beginning that I got the pronunciation right in German or in English. And that's why I keep an eye on that. Let's put it that way. So it's very important to me. So I tend more to mix grammars or words, but the pronunciation, it's there. Yeah.
And that's a good point. I had a guest very early on in the podcast. She's also bilingual, and she teaches English to Germans. And she said, one of my favorite parts of that conversation was along those lines as well. She said, people will listen to you longer if you have good pronunciation with terrible grammar than if you have perfect grammar with really bad pronunciation. Yeah. And I think that's a good point.
Yeah, because they can understand you better, actually, because the words make sense.
The words are the words.
Yes.
They can hear what words you're using.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I hope, and now I'm feeling super conscious after giving this big speech on pronunciation. I hope my pronunciation in English is not that terrible.
Oh no, God, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Because you know, you have this stereotypical, I know that there's this super old YouTube video of the Italian going to Malta, I think it's called.
I don't know if I've seen that.
Don't. It's terrible, but
I suppose it's that stereotypical Italian accent, the old fashioned. Can you do it?
Like Family Guy going to the butcher, the Italian butcher, like the babadi boobidi thing.
Yeah.
Yes. I hate it so much.
That is very stereotypical. It's also like that old stereotypical German accent that you also hear in those kinds of shows where they don't. The Germans don't speak like that. Where it's like
excellent.
Und ja, we are going to be going to the store now. No one speaks like that.
Well,
okay, yeah, not no one. Carmen, you're right. That is true. So one of the things that people often talk about is that there are words, English words, that the Germans have borrowed and sometimes given completely new meanings to. But by that I mean things like handy for telephone, or fitness studio for a gym, or beamer for a projector.
Yes.
Which is bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Are there similar examples of where German has done that with Italian words?
Yeah, definitely. There are a couple of words that comes to mind. The first one, of course, is ciao.
Yeah.
Like they, especially in the southern part of Germany, so Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, they use it a lot to say goodbye. But that's the weird thing. In Italian, we use ciao also as a greeting, like when we arrive and when we go away.
Yeah.
And there have been a couple of times where I'm meeting with Italian friends and German or non-Italian friends, and I say ciao to the Italian friends, and the German are looking at me like,
are we going
I'm
already?
Some weirdo, like, you just arrived. Why are you going already? Like, what is happening? Time has lost its meanings. Well, during the quarantine, it did, but yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the first example that comes to mind. Then there are these basta or finito. Which I don't know. I think that I feel like the Germans use it to feel like cool Italian, like basta finito as some kind of definitive, like decisive thing, like basta.
This is it.
It's over. This is it.
We're done.
We're done. I'm finished.
Yeah.
Which is weird, but hey, it's their language.
It could do well, it's kind of your language too, but anyway, yes, it is their language.
I mean, yeah, it's my language too, but yeah. And then I have this example is also good for the English language because if I'm correct, you use it too, which is bravo.
Yes.
To compliment someone.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from the opera because you have most of the well, not most of the operas, but a lot of operas are written in Italian.
Yes.
But let me ask you this.
Oh God. This is something that I've been doing wrong my whole life. I can feel it. Let's go. Let's do this.
So what if the singer is a woman? Would you still say bravo?
Well, not when you're asking me with that look on your face and that tone in your voice. Then no, you wouldn't. So let's put it this way. I would, up until now, I would have said bravo regardless of the person, whether it's man or woman. But I'm guessing that it would then be bravissimo or something different.
No. What bravissimo is the superlative of bravo.
Oh, it's a superlative of bravo. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
if it's a woman in Italian, you would say brava. Because she's a woman and bravo is for a man.
I had no idea.
So the thing I'm pissed off about this is you German want me to speak with all the, as said previously, fucking adjective Endungen correctly.
Correct.
And I had to learn a third neutral genre. And you can't use brava, which is the feminine version of bravo, correctly.
Get your shit together, Germans. If Carmen is putting in the effort on the adjective endings, you can put in the effort on bravo.
Oh, it's just one word.
That's all she's asking. That's all she's asking. Just one word.
Yes.
Get it right.
Just one word.
No, but to be fair, and to be fair to the Germans, I've just learned something now as well that I did not know that. So brava. So I can imagine you just giving a great presentation at work or anything, and at the end people say bravo. I'm like, no, it's not bravo.
I'm not a man.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I guess the last one, the last word that would come to mind, which is kind of a false friend, is prima.
Prima.
You use prima in German to say something like it's excellent or
great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's do this. I don't know, someone suggests to meet on Wednesday at 3 and you say, okay, prima.
Prima.
Cool.
Yeah.
In Italian, the word prima means actually before.
Really?
Yes. I don't know. I'm thinking of a phrase like prima di andare a letto fatti una doccia, which means before going to bed, take a shower.
Right. So we're just saying.
For an example.
So the Germans are going before.
Before.
Let's meet at the cinema. Before. That is hilarious.
Yes, it is. It is.
But that's exactly like what they've done with the English words, where they've taken it and just given it a whole new meaning. Just completely randomly assigned it a new meaning. Germans. So
we love them anyway.
We do. I do. I really do. I make a lot of fun of them on this podcast, and I make a lot of fun of the language, but I love both. I love German people, I love the country, and I also love the language. So I can make fun of you guys. What can I say?
Bravo.
Bravo. You mentioned one podcast before, but you've got two podcasts. So you've got the Italian one. Tell me what the Italian one is about.
Okay, I say the title even though no one will understand it. With Crucchio Terroni siamo tutti fannulloni, which is an ironic phrase that means it doesn't matter if you're from the north or from the south, you are a lazy person. we are all lazy.
Okay.
It's conversation every time with a different person, mostly a friend or an acquaintance, about different topics that reflects the opinion of our generation on stuff. Okay. I was born in 1989, so I'm gonna be 31 this year, and I grew up not seeing myself represented anywhere in the media, in politics, whatever.
Yeah.
And we were always, as a generation, labeled as something, like also from like important political people, ministry or something like that. Like we were lazy, we were choosy because we wouldn't take whatever job it will come our way, or we were the ones like migrating to other countries because we didn't want to do the hard way and stay in Italy and stuff like that. So I kind of wanted to build a counter narrative on that and show how many amazing and various and different works we are doing all over the world. So I'm interviewing friends that are both living in Italy or somewhere else, and talking mostly about political stuff, but also so kind of general discussions, like the social pressure of getting married at a certain age or having babies, and stuff like that. And it's been fun. It's been a long ride. It's 2.5 years now, and I love it. So if you want to learn Italian or refresh, if you're listening and you want to refresh your Italian,
take a listen. I'll put links to that in the show notes. And then you've also got a second podcast, which is in German, which is also linked more to the work that you do. So maybe you can talk about that as well.
I do that actually as a job. Sometimes I feel myself weird if I'm saying I'm a podcaster, but I kind of am because I'm doing it as also as a part of my job. So in German, I do together with Sarah, a colleague of mine, Die Farbe der Nation, which means the color of the nation. And it's a podcast about everyday racism, migration, and the identity or the feeling of belonging. And it started also in August 2018. We reached 50-something episodes. And most of them, it's just the two of us talking about our experiences, but always, and I know those are, especially these days, hard topics because you have to look inside you, like look in the mirror very hard to learn and change some patterns and behaviors, but also to kind of understand your own experience sometimes. Like, it was super interesting that through the experience and the conversation I did with Sarah, I realized that I had experienced much more racism than I thought here in Germany. Yeah, maybe I should mention one of the important part is like the main concept, the pitch of the podcast is that basically it's a conversation between me, the real migrant that wasn't born in Germany, but that is white. So I haven't had that many or that profound experiences with everyday racism. And Sarah, my colleague, which is German, born and raised in Germany, but since her father is from Sudan, she's not white, and she had like the most terrible, really depressing experiences, especially at school. And so this started with this combination of perspectives. And then we said, okay, we can't really, just the two of us, cover the entire perspective of everyday racism because every ethnicity or background has different type of stereotypes thrown at their way and stuff like that. So we started doing also interviews with other people or asked listeners to send us vocal voicemails with their own experience that we will comment on in order to use basically the podcast as a platform for people to express themselves and just talk about this hard stuff in a normal conversation. Because I guess I listened to your latest episode with Jessica. Was really good because it was kind of a light conversation with lots of humor and irony. And that's what helped us also to have this conversation. We are almost never too serious about this stuff. You guys are
fun. You're really fun.
Oh, thank you. And that's a way to survive racism, but also to open conversation. And I guess also to open hearts in the sense of it's easier for people that haven't experienced racism that way to listen to a lighter conversation, I guess. And we are part of a network of BPOC podcaster in Germany. So we're not even remotely the only ones. There's like 30 other, at least, podcasters with different backgrounds that are doing great job. So I would encourage you to listen to us, to them. And I recently, a journalist published a almost complete list of those podcasts. So if your listeners want to have a peek in the list, I can send you the link.
Send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
Because as we've seen recently, these kinds of discussions are crucial for society.
Absolutely. And I think that the podcast platform is a very powerful way to start conversations, because to consume a podcast, you have to listen, and listening is the first very important step to start this conversation.
And it also feels kind of intimate, I think. When you're listening to those discussions, you feel like you're part of the discussion in a way. So I think I think you're right. Podcast might be a very crucial thing in this what's happening now, what needs to happen in these dialogues.
Yeah.
Yes. Carmen, thank you so much for joining me. It has been amazing talking to you. A lot of fun.
Aw.
And I am in absolute awe of your language skills. And yeah.
Let's talk again in a couple of years. Then we'll see.
And you will be coming on the show to talk about politics in early
Of
next
course.
year in the
Yeah.
run up to the election, and we'll talk about that closer to the time. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was very fun.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you can get all the details of the show, recent episodes, links to my social media accounts, sign up for my newsletter if you go to thegermanyexperience.de/subscribe. You can also leave me a voice message if you go to thegermanyexperience.de/message. You can record me a 30-second message. And you might want to stick around, by the way, to the end of this episode till after the theme music, because I got a little something for you there. What else is there to say? I think we're done. Links in show notes. Yeah, we're done. Oh, of course, as usual, music in this episode, theme song by my band, and additional music by Ryan Anderson, a song called Until the End. I'll speak to you next week. Auf Wiederhören. I'm hearing like a... Is that coming from my side? There's like a high... It's almost like a cricket sound in the... Or maybe I'm going slowly insane. I'm like, what is that? What is it? Can you hear that? Can you? Okay. Oh, that's what I wanted. That's right. That's one of my things that I definitely wanted to ask you about. Okay, so let me ask you that. Give me a second to take a
Rewind. You have to keep that in the podcast.
What's your background and how did you end up in Germany?
Oh, okay. Good question. Well, it's actually not a good question. It's a
How dare you, Carmen?
normal question.
How dare you? I thought it was a fantastic question.
Yes. No, it's a great first question. I was just criticizing my own answer.
I read somewhere that one of the most said phrases on podcasts is "That's a great question."
That's a great question. So this was not a great question. It was
an
a
average.
nice question.
Yeah,
It was average.
It was mediocre at best.